Hey, how's it going? It's Julio again with the Small Camera Big Picture podcast. Today I'm talking to someone I'm pretty excited to have on the show, Joe Edelman. So thank you, Joe, for coming on. Before we start, though, I got to let everybody know because I want to kind of give the Cliff Notes version about Joe. I think most of the people that listen know who you are, but basically, Joe's been shooting as a professional for 40 plus years, photojournalism, commercial work, fashion work, mentor for models, mentor now for photographers, Olympus visionary, just a really rad force of positivity. And dude, I can just go on and on and on and on. But the easy thing, folks, is that once we go through this, there's going to be a ton of links at the bottom. Just dig in. Joe puts a lot of cool stuff out there on socials for free, and we're gonna dig in. So, Joe, thanks for coming on, man.
Julio, thanks for having me, and I will send you the check for that intro. That was awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, it's cool, man. I've been a stalker of yours for some time, and I'm like, oh, look at this guy. Right. So I noticed. Well, we're gonna go over a bunch of stuff. I got to keep my brain on track, otherwise I'm.
That's all right. I know that feeling. Yep, I do.
So, you've been a pro for 40 plus years. You've seen a ton of changes. I mean, I've seen a good amount of changes, but I've only been shooting since 2005. But you've seen film to digital and now to Micro Four Thirds and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And one thing that I noticed when I was listening to Togchat number 27, which is a live show that you put on, you said basically towards the end, we are at this point in history where people are willing to pay for fantasy, and there's not enough photographers offering fantasy. So how did you come to that conclusion? Because I feel that you're like right on the money.
So it has to do with the 42 years thing. So, one of the downsides of getting older is that the past becomes a lot clearer, but you also start to realize that when you were a kid and all those people were trying to share their experience with you, they were actually pretty spot on. We just didn't want to hear it, right? So what I've learned is that by looking backwards, I can see a lot forward, because culturally, we tend to recycle a lot of things, even though we think we're making it up fresh. So my example that I give to people, and I talk about this a lot, I lived through the 80s and survived. But back in the 80s, if we look at history in the United States, Ronald Reagan was the president. The economy was not great. People were struggling. Ronald Reagan, whether you like his politics or not, this isn't about politics, he was a great cheerleader. He made people feel good about being Americans. And there was a phenomenon that came about. Shopping malls were huge. Remember, shopping malls became big in the 1970s, and by the end of the 70s, every town had a shopping mall. Every decent-sized town had a shopping mall. On Friday nights and Saturday nights, women would go out with a friend or a couple of friends to the mall, and they would walk into a storefront where they'd spend a couple of hours, and they would get their hair done. And we're talking big hair, 80s, right? They would get their makeup done. They would wrap a bunch of boas around themselves, and they would get these ridiculous-looking pictures done at a place called Glamour Shots. They spent money not for the pictures, because the pictures were cheesy. And it's not like they could share them on social media, so most of them went home. A couple relatives would have a good laugh, or they'd come out at, Christmas time. But other than that, they stuck under the bed or in a photo album somewhere. But they were paying for the experience, for the fun of it. So we have this piece, historically, this business model that says people will pay for experience. Fast forward 2019, one of the things that you read in every marketing article, that you read in every social article, whether you're following social media or just culture in general, is that millennials and Generation Zers, the one after them, they are much more focused in life on the experiences they have and the quality of their life. They're not the material generation like my generation was. They don't care that much about houses. They're fine living in apartments, etc. So they're going to spend money for experiences. So I am not suggesting that people start wrapping boas around somebody and doing the cheesy makeup. But what I am suggesting is I hear a lot of photographers say, I love the creative things that you do, Joe, but I can't make money with it. And I say, baloney, you can make a lot of money with it. And there are photographers that are doing it. What they do, they network, first of all, but I don't mean the kind of network where you go and have a couple drinks, get a buzz on, eat some food. I mean real networking, productive networking. They hook up with a local spa. They hook up with a local hair salon, a local nail salon. And what they do is they cross-market amongst all of their businesses. They make sure that these establishments have some pictures to hang on the wall, maybe some brochures or at a minimum business cards. But what they're selling is a full day. Person's going to start out in the morning, go to the spa, spend a couple hours, have a great spa treatment, relax, chill. Then they're going to go get their nails done, even get a pedicure done. Then they're going to go and they're going to get their hair done and their makeup done. And at the end of the day, they're going to get a picture to commemorate all this. And this idea is really not that revolutionary, and not even just because of the 1980s. Boudoir photographers figured this out like 10 years ago. And they've been doing similar things along the way. But I keep hearing portrait photographers like kind of complaining and whining, like, well, yeah, but we don't have anything to sell around that. Yeah, you do. And it doesn't have to be crazy and creative. It can be an amazing portrait. But with the experience built around it, then for the younger generations today, it holds more meaning. It's got more value to them, because the big thing about photography, especially in the iPhone age, it's about the perceived value of the work you're doing. Photographers just kind of got to wake up and realize, whether they like it or not, it's not all about their photography. So that's the gist of it.
Yeah, that's I hear that. So I mentor some people in my class on vision, and some of them are still like trying to understand that is a lot of the job is the providing experience for the clients. Some people are like, well, I went out and bought this new camera and it's way better than what potential clients shooting with their phone. I'm like, right, well, but how are you solving their problems, and what are you bringing? You know, people can't answer that. Absolutely. You know, because it's hard. That's the hard stuff that traditional photo education often leaves out. So,
I completely agree, and it left it out back when I started. That was not a piece of it. If you're not providing value, even on social media, not to veer off track, so I won't go down that whole path, but even when it comes to social media, if you're not providing value, people don't care. People are not going to connect. All you're doing is adding to noise at that point, and spending $1,000 or $5,000 or $20,000 on camera equipment doesn't automatically earn you the right to be charging a lot of money or making a lot of money, or for that matter, even having customers. It is indeed, it's the value that you provide based on your customers' needs.
So, I mean, and correct me if you're seeing something different, but I see now more than ever, because we have this accessibility to very high-end cameras at not pretty insane prices, but at the end of the day, the photos end up where on Instagram, that's more or less where they all end up. So, you know, but we're also seeing so many photographers that are getting into the business, sharing their knowledge, which is great, but it's often at a technical mentality. So essentially what's happening is they're teaching their people to become technicians, versus what I see you do a lot is teaching people how to become deeper, you know, more effective artists that happen to use the camera too. So do you think that part of teaching people photography, as far as like the deeper sides, you think that is going to start to grow, or is that still kind of people still shying away from that, you know?
I hope it grows. I mean, so a full disclosure, a little bit of background, so that people have an understanding that I'm actually not as brilliant as I may seem. I am married to a woman who is a college professor, right? So my wife is a college professor. She's a cognitive psychologist. Fortunately for me, she's not a clinical psychologist. I'd be in a straitjacket by now for sure. But she has really helped me a lot to understand more of how people connect with information and how people actually learn. Because ironically, it's not just because she's a college professor, but that's actually part of what she researches, is how people actually learn. So, you know, when I started my YouTube thing, just to go back a little bit, I was not one of the first people out there doing YouTube. I had stuck a video up and dabbled and tried stuff, and they were really bad. But, you know, I knew there was value in YouTube, but I didn't know what I was going to do. When I decided to go full time with this whole thing, my challenge was, what can I bring to the table that's not noise? What can I do that nobody else is doing? And it's certainly not going to be my photography. I'm a good photographer. I completely understand where I fit in the realm of things. I'm not a great photographer. I'm not going to blow people away. So where's my value? My value was, having done this for so long, I spent a lot of my life solving the problems that photographers face and figuring out how to overcome them and get past them. So from the beginning, I established the mission statement, helping photographers understand the hows and whys behind great photography. Part of it was in rebellion to the way that I learned photography. Learning photography in the 70s, I started out when I got my first camera, I was infatuated right out of the box. I went to the library, started taking out a bunch of books on lighting and composition and all this stuff. And then when I was afraid I had wasted my money on my camera, because these books, most of them were written like in the 50s and 60s. They were like bigger than a Bible, all black and white pictures. They were boring as all get out. And everything was like, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way, and extremely technical. So fast forward, I'm a firm believer that you've got to have a good technical foundation, meaning depth of field is not blurry backgrounds in bokeh. Understanding the inverse square law. Trust me, I can't do the math behind the inverse square law, but give me 3 hours and I'll show you 1,000 combinations of using the inverse square law, right? So you've got to have that foundation to be able to produce consistently good results. That's really the key, because for any photographer, whether they're amateur, advanced amateur, or pro, if they're going to continue to grow and if they're going to have any sense of accomplishment in what they're doing at any level, it's going to come down to that consistency. Can they pick up the camera and produce something that either they're going to like or their client's going to like, et cetera? And that's where the foundation comes in. So I think people, when they start YouTube, they tend to kind of teach from where their knowledge base is. And I'm not going to name any names, but there are some YouTubers who have actually only been shooting for a couple of years. But I think their channels are great because they are smart enough to teach from their experience level. They're not trying to be some expert. They are really, really honest and transparent about what they know and what they don't know. And so the people that follow them are kind of learning along with them, which I think is wonderful. There are, of course, people that are really parading and pretending to be experts, and they're just spouting a lot of steam. There are people that teach a lot of really, really bad habits, really bad habits. One of my favorites, now that we have live view LCDs on the back of all of our cameras, is walking around with a camera out here taking pictures like you're the hottest thing ever.
Gangster style.
Right. There's just so much wrong with that. Like, my head explodes when I see that. Number one, chapter 1 in every camera manual made for every camera on the market, it tells you to hold the camera in your left hand, hand underneath. So the manufacturers are probably onto something there. Number 2, there is so much cognitive science. Holding a camera out in front of you, your brain is being forced to process so much additional information that you miss really, really, really important details. That's why the cameras have viewfinders. Sure, if I've got to do a low angle shot and I'm going to kneel on the ground, yeah, that's the great thing about having that flip out screen. I'm going to, eyeball it from there so I don't have to lay in the mud. But that's an exception to the rule, not the standard practice. So that was a really long answer to your question. My answer is, I hope we see more people that are trying to connect with folks in terms of what they really want to do and what they really want to learn. Because what I see, people that spend too much time on YouTube, where it becomes like YouTube becomes their photography. If we had to actually add up how many minutes did they go shoot compared to how many minutes a week do they watch videos, they're watching more videos than they are shooting. And then when they do go shoot, they're honestly like zombies. They're just doing what they saw on YouTube because, like, there's 6 guys on YouTube that are doing this same thing. One of my favorites is, take the 600 watt second flash outside, put it in a 32-inch octabox, and overpower the sun. And that's like the only way you can shoot outside. Like, I'm not saying that that's bad every now and then, but to do it because everybody else is doing it, that's just really boring. So yeah, I hope it evolves more that way. But as much as it's kind of a problem, I think now is an incredibly exciting time to be a photographer. It's kind of part of the evolution. When I started, photography wasn't that accessible. Now it's incredibly accessible. So you do have more people that get into it. You have more people that find their passion with it. And I think a lot of these problems that some of us complain about and that people do complain about in the community, it's honestly just because there's more people involved. I think those problems always existed. There were always lazy learners. Even back in the film days, there were lazy learners. So I just think, some of it becomes a little bit more visible. Some of it becomes more obvious because it's online and it's accessible. Even the idea of professional photographers. A lot of professionals today are part-time. And that's okay. Like, I'll admit, I had to go through that mental transition. I worked very hard to sustain, my income over the years, working full-time, doing photography. And now the fact of the matter is, and I'm trying desperately to remember where I just saw this, but a statistic that came out either from the IRS or from somewhere that more than 50% of the people claiming photography as a career on their tax return or one of their careers or businesses are actually doing it part-time. That's not really bad. Does it really matter if a person's doing it full-time or part-time, provided that they are able to deliver a quality product consistently and satisfy their client? So I just think, we're evolving. But all in all, for me, I think now is like an incredibly exciting time to be involved with photography because the technology is allowing us to do things that when I started, I could have never dreamed of. And just to see all these changes and to be able to, play with all these exciting tools that we have, we're at a point now, much more so than when I started, the only limitations we really have as photographers, it's our brains. If we can think it, we can make it.
So do you think that how basically when photography came out, basically all the photorealistic painters more or less were out of a job, and then you saw surrealists come out, and
right.
Do you think we were in that area now with photography where the cameras are so good at doing whatever we want it to do that's in here, so now we really have to focus on our creativity and our unique view of how we're shooting to kind of stand out?
No, but let me explain. And I don't have any, full disclosure, I don't have any firm statistics that I can give anyone. And believe me, I've been on the lookout for statistics to either support or tell me that I'm wrong with this idea. But I think when it comes to this concept, photographers making a great living today, I don't think that we have any fewer photographers making a great living today than we did 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago. I really don't. What I think we have is we have more photographers that would like to make money, but we all know, if you're passionate about photography, and I'm sure you can name one or two people at the top of your head that you've made acquaintances of, photographers that are making money. They are maybe commercial advertising people, maybe they're people that do documentary work and publish, but their social media presence is like zilch. People don't know about it, right? But what are they doing? They're keeping the head down, and they're out there working for Fortune 100 companies and traveling the world, and they're doing like the heavy duty lifting, the real lifting in the photography world. Like, I'm fully aware that the work I'm doing, I'm helping people that are starting out, and helping them to be able to advance faster and hopefully not throw away a ton of money. That's regardless of what I would wish that I am or think that I am, that's what I'm doing. I'm not a guy that's doing the heavy lifting in the photography community. Most of those people, we don't even know about them. And even the ones we do, like an Annie Leibovitz, or even a Joe McNally, okay? People that definitely have a huge name recognition, how often do you actually see them coming out with new stuff on social media? Not really that often, because the majority of the work they're doing, they can't put it on social media because their client owns it. Okay, and they're still, they're not sitting at home with their feet up in between the 3 months apart that we see them on social media releasing something. They're working, right? They're in demand. So I don't think that we actually have any less photographers, and I don't think that it's actually going to become hard. Like, when people start this, it's so hard to, be seen on social media, and all this is hard because it's competition, and people want a wedding for $500. I don't actually see that as being anything different. And I think we have a lot of really, really bad misconceptions. Because believe me, when a photographer says to me, they start complaining about that client or potential client that said, hey, can you shoot my wedding for $500? I shut them down really quick. It's like, stop your complaining because you're the jerk. There are a lot of people that can't even afford $500 to get pictures of their wedding. So you're saying just because you have all this money invested in gear, and maybe you have 10 years of experience or 20 years of experience, you're saying that these people don't deserve to have photos of the most important day of their life. That's bull. If they can only afford $500 and you normally charge $5,000 or $10,000, it's a real simple equation. They're not your client. They're not bad for asking. They're just not your client. Like, not everybody can be your client, right? So I think a lot of this stuff gets blown out of proportion, and I don't think people look at the bigger picture, which is, potentially the product of getting old and kind of having lived through a lot of this evolution. I think I look at it a lot differently. I think there's room for anybody that's willing to put in the hard work. I got a message 2 days ago. I won't give all the specifics, but this was a new photographer thanking me so much for all the work I do on YouTube, explaining he's been shooting for less than a year, and he really loves the idea of being able to teach and help out high school students, and he wanted to know how he could get a camera company to sponsor him like I'm sponsored. Been shooting for about a year. I wrote back, and it's like, well, number one, thank you for the kind words, but I'm going to be really straight with you. If you've only been shooting for a year, you hold no value to a camera company. You don't have a portfolio. You don't have a track record of work. More importantly, you don't have a social following. You don't have any influence. So where is the value for that company? Really, what you're asking for is for somebody to give you a bunch of free equipment so you can go play. It's like, it doesn't work that way. And people ask me all the time, it's like, hey, how do I become, an Olympus visionary like you? It took me 42 years. I don't know you want to try my path. Okay. So, but that's, put in the hard work and shoot and do something that has value. I mean, obviously with Olympus, we have people like Jay Dickman, who shoots for National Geographic, has a Pulitzer Prize. I'm not at that level, but I bring a different thing, a different set of values to the program. Larry Price, 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner. These are people that have incredible careers. That's how you get to that level. So I see the problem more as a lot of the people falling out and a lot of the people feeling that there's just too much competition. I don't see it as competition. I just see it as lazy people. They're not willing to put in the hard work. They think that you're just going to be able to pick up the camera every day and have fun. When the reality is, if you want to be a professional photographer, you learn how to run a business. If you run the business successfully, then you have the luxury of being able to take pictures for a living. But people want it to be the other way around, and it just doesn't work that way.
It's true. And if you're a commercial photographer, you have to shoot basically what the market allows. Sure. And if you don't, if you're not offering that product, then it's not, you're not getting hired. So how, right. Basically, so for commercial photographers, or for you, for instance, are you like kind of doing your own creative stuff just for your educational channel, then still doing commercial work? Or have you kind of like branched off away from like your commercial jobs altogether?
So 3 years ago, just about 3 years now, when I made this move to do the YouTube channel and do the teaching and everything, I kept 2 of my long-term commercial clients that are dress wholesalers. The Philadelphia market, I'm in Allentown, Pennsylvania, but Philadelphia, which is not far away, is one of the biggest dress markets in the United States, bridal gowns, prom gowns, that kind of stuff. So I held on to 2 of my clients that I do work for 3 times a year, a couple days a pop. It's really good money. I stopped taking clients at that point completely. So, and by the way, it wasn't like, ooh, let's do YouTube, it'll be fun. It was about a year of putting together a business plan, doing a lot of research, seeing if I really thought that I could pull this off, because I was going to be giving up a really good income. So, and then of course I was fortunate enough that I had a wife who was willing to support me through this crazy idea. And I gave myself 12 months to be able to recoup my income, with the goal being that in the second 12 months, I had to do even better, because I still wanted that money back. I wasn't just willing to write off a year's worth of earnings. So I kept a little bit of a buffer with the 2 commercial clients, but now I do the educational piece full time. The stuff that people see is the YouTube stuff, which of course you don't make any money on YouTube. I don't mind telling people I make about $700 a month on YouTube. That's it. So that is not paying my bills at all. Okay. I pursued the YouTube idea to be able to get my name out so that people would say, hey, we really like this guy. Let's get him to come and teach and speak. So that was the core piece of both kind of cause and effect. Here's the marketing. That's what's going to happen. The goal was to be able to teach. So I teach by traveling, doing workshops. I do some workshops here. And one of the things that people don't see me do because they're done privately, I do a lot of private workshops, but I also do a lot of private workshops via video. So as an example, 2 weeks ago, I did a workshop for a client in Australia via video. They normally shoot in their garage. So they went into their garage with their laptop. They had a mannequin that they practice on. They set up their lights and they turned the laptop on. We used Zoom. I use a 2-camera setup with Zoom, and I can basically do a demo, show them how I would set something up, and then watch them try it themselves, work through it, help them, manipulate, make changes. When I shoot something, I can tether and share the screen so they're seeing exactly what I'm doing. So I also do a lot of kind of one-on-one personal workshops that way, where people don't have to travel to me. And I do have people that travel here too. I had a guy here from Seattle last week. So basically the educational piece is my business model at this point, which it's kind of after 40 plus years, it allows me to stay doing something that I love and that I'm passionate about, but I get to have a lot more fun because for the first time in my life, I am shooting what I want to shoot when I want to shoot it and still getting paid, which is cool. But it took a long time to get to that point.
And that's really, I think, the holy grail for a lot of us. I mean, when I left corporate America in March 25th, 2005, I was just like, I just want to shoot what I love and get paid. Yep. And obviously that's not the case because sometimes clients call me up like, can you shoot this cup of yogurt? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And I photograph yogurt or books or whatever. I photographed a color chart once and got paid for a color chart in white. I'm like, yeah, of course. But but I was always like, I'm doing this so that I have more time to shoot the things that I love and that matter. So that's really the holy grail. I mean, I think a lot of people are like, to be a professional photographer, they're thinking like in the old school sense where all you're doing is shooting and getting paid, which now there's all these different types of professional photography, like, educating, it's still professional photography.
Absolutely. I think even, as a photographer, there are so many more opportunities, or let's take the word opportunities out, so many more genres of photography that you could potentially make money at than there were even 20 years ago, but especially 30, 40, years ago when I started. There's so many more, opportunities. I think that's also part of, again, like we talked about, why there's more competition, because part of that is because photography's become more accessible, so there's more people wanting to do it. But yeah, I mean, there's almost an endless list of possibilities of things that you can make money at as a photographer. And the key to it is a lesson that was taught to me by one of my mentors very, very early on when it came to the idea of making money as a photographer. It was to understand that, number one, do what you do to the best of your ability, because that's actually all you're capable of doing. You can't be somebody else. That's why I'm so aggressive with that term zombie-tographers, because so many people are just chasing what somebody else is doing. So you do what you do to the best of your ability, and then you find somebody dumb enough to pay for it. And essentially, though, we can go all the way back to the master artists. And that's how it's always worked for creatives. They didn't make a lot of money in their lifetime, but they found people who appreciated their art. So those people would put a roof over their head. They would give them a place to work. They would put clothes on their back. They would feed them. And in exchange, they got their artwork. So it was a way for them to be able to sustain their ability to create. That's no different than it's really been throughout history, and it's no different than it is today. We talked about kind of people feeling a little bit entitled because they've got a fancy camera. There is. I mean, I think one of the biggest humps for a new photographer, so new could be young or just new at any age, to get over is that idea that just because you think you're good, just because you get 20,000 likes on Instagram, just because you got lots of equipment, that doesn't mean that person C is going to look at your work and say, oh my God, I think it's amazing. It may not be their taste. It may not be their style. It could be any number of things. that doesn't make them wrong either. You know, there's that corny old phrase that's been around forever: beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's still around because it's really very appropriate. There's no, when it comes to creativity, there's no set of guidelines that says, yes, this is the most creative thing. It's completely subjective.
So how do we manage then our expectations of how people look at our work, and how do we not fall in love with our latest photo?
Okay. So let me take that from the end. Fortunately for me, throughout most of my career, I get bored really quick. So when I take a shot, and this is actually where my tagline, "Your best shot is your next shot," came from. During one of my Togchats, somebody asked me the question, like, what's your favorite picture you have ever taken? And it kind of caught me off guard. And I was like, honestly, it's the next one, because all the others, like, been there, done that. Like, what is to come? For me, it's the process. So in my case, photography has always actually been more about access than it has been the art form. And what I mean by that is I was a really shy teenager, really shy. And in 7th grade, I had a math teacher who was the advisor for the school yearbook. And I walked into school. I used to take my camera to school every day just because it looked cool. That was it, okay? And I walked in one day and he put 2 rolls of film on my desk, like slammed them down. 2 rolls of film to a 7th grader back then was like, that was gold. I'm like, what is this for? He's like, you bring that, and his exact words back then, you bring that damn camera to class every day, but I never see you use it. Go shoot some pictures for the yearbook. And I was like, of what? He's like, anything you want. So I shot 2 rolls of film. I handed them back to him. He developed them. He said, this stuff looks good. And he handed me a 3x5 card. And he said, here's your assignment. And I panicked. The assignment was to go after school to, I don't remember what club it was, but it was all 9th graders, kids that never talked to me, ever. And I was shy. So I got to that room. I was sweating bullets because inside everybody was like partying and yelling and laughing. Like, oh my God, oh my God. So finally I opened the door and the room got dead silent and I was about to run. But all of a sudden, everybody's faces lit up with this big smile. It's like, the photographer's here. Come on in. We're ready. What do you want us to do? And I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, these people are talking to me. And so everything I've done, from the photojournalism to the portraits and wedding, like every step of the way, with the possible exception of the little bit of time I did product work and food advertising work, it's always been about people. It's been about access to people and experiencing people. So, and I think it's worth pointing that out because for different people, the real motivator is different. Some people it is about art or some type of creative form. I love all that, but for me, it's always been the access. So that's the piece that I really, kind of focus on the most with what I'm doing. I think it's a hard question to answer straight up because it's really different. It's really, really different for everyone. But for me, it's always about that access. In terms of setting the expectations, I try to be, like, through my Togchats and through the questions I get, I try to be really transparent with people about this is what my career really was. People will see me do a shoot on YouTube, or they come and see me at a trade show and, I'm on a stage and I'm presenting for Olympus. And it's got this kind of glamorous piece to it. I am blessed to be able to do what I do. But this is really, at this point where I'm at, it's kind of the payoff for all the hard work that I've done. And that's the piece people don't get. So I try to be really transparent about that. Like, the expectation is you can do any of this, but you don't get to do it tomorrow. Like, I didn't get to do it tomorrow. It's very similar to actors. There's a thing with actors where a movie comes out and you'll hear the critics talking about overnight sensation. Think of any actor that in your lifetime who was labeled an overnight sensation, and then go read their bio. And you will find that every single one of them had been in the business for at least 10 years. Many of them were living in their cars at one point to try and make it. The overnight success piece, that's a public perception. So I think it will be an ongoing battle to convince people of, what are the expectations, because everybody wants a shortcut. And social media sometimes makes it feel like you can get a shortcut because, you've got 100,000 followers. 100,000 followers doesn't mean anything if you're not figuring out how to monetize them, right? So that's the hard work. That's the part that takes time.
So the basic strategy then for what I tell people, and correct me if this is not for you too, but basically it's on social media. You provide value and to people and educate them and have fun with it. But then the idea is to steer them to your main site where they can learn more about you, purchase goods or services or whatever. That's kind of like what you got going on, right?
Yeah, it's all about value. Yeah. You know, it's fascinating on the social media thing. The thing that I try to make photographers understand, and it's interesting. So one of the things that I do to try and get people's attention, old guys like me actually understand social media better than young kids do, categorically. But here's the problem. Most older generation folks, they're intimidated by the technology and they don't see the value in walking around like this. So that intimidates them. But the actual concept behind social media and how to make it work, older generation understands it much better than younger generation. And I give this example. If you were to go to a cocktail party or some kind of social event, and somebody walks up to you and says, hey, I love that shirt, you would not just turn around and walk in the other direction. We would not do that. That's rude. But yet, on social media, you post a picture. Number one, posting just a picture is rather arrogant. Why should anybody care about your picture?
Because you're awesome.
Give them a reason to care. Well, yeah, I know, right? But once you posted that picture and somebody comes and likes it, or worse yet, they comment on it, and that comment goes unanswered, that's the same as somebody comes up and says, hey, I really like that, and you walk away. No different, you know, I talk about just posting a picture. If you were at that cocktail party, you wouldn't walk up to someone with your phone, put a picture on it, and be like, and just shove it in their face. That would be ridiculous. But yet that's what we do on Instagram, and that's what we do on Facebook. We stick a picture up there, and we expect that people actually care. So yeah, I mean, if it's a photographer that wants to do like portraits or weddings, the first thing I explain to them is like, look, understand that your potential clients don't really care about your photography. They're going to look at your website. They're going to look at a couple of your pictures. They're going to decide really fast, I like what this guy does or this woman does. But then what they want to know is, I'm going to have this person spend the most important day of my life with me and record that. Do I like them? Do I trust them? Do I feel confident about them? So how do you put that into a picture? You can't, but you can certainly put it in the caption. And part of the way you do it is not by saying to people, I'm reliable, I'm on time, you know, all of these things, because talk is cheap. What you do is you talk about the experience that you had with the person or persons in your photograph. And by telling those little stories, those little snippets, you're sharing a lot about your personality and your passion for what you do. Because I love it when a bio starts out, I'm passionate about photography. Well, I would hope so. Otherwise, you're pretty sorry shape, right? I mean, you know, why are you chasing a career if you're not passionate about it? That sucks. So you know, again, it's understanding, you know, you use the word value. I use that word value all the time. It's understanding how can you communicate to that to people and give that impression. And it's not something you do just in one post. It's got to be a part of everything that you do. So even like for me, I'll admit, on the social media side, I was very late to the party with Instagram. Instagram bugged the heck out of me when it first came to, you know, its fruition, because I felt like I was just shouting, sticking pictures up. And even if I put a lot of information in the caption, we all know people don't really read the captions, right? So I struggle with it. So literally as recently as about, I think it's about 14 or 15 months ago, so maybe a year and a half almost, I only had about 3,000 Instagram followers. Because I didn't post that often. I'd go on vacation and post a food picture. Like there was just no focus. I had no, you know, nothing that was really able to connect to people. And I, every so often, would try to get into that habit of let's post like every day, every other day, and that was just pointless too. So now I post on Instagram on average about once every week and a half to 2 weeks. And I'm organically adding just over 1,000 people a month. So I'm up over 15,000, like 15.8 thousand. But my posts are mini lessons. So I started to get the idea when Instagram came up with the swipes. And then when they made it so you could put video and pictures in the swipes, I'll post an image, and the swipe then is a behind the scenes video clip or some lighting diagrams. And then indeed now the caption, I can tell more of the story behind the picture, because once people realize they can learn from it, they'll actually take the time to read the caption and read all of the information. Plus, since I'm a photographer that has sponsors, since now I have people reading the captions, I'm also able to tag my sponsors, and they're actually getting traffic, substantial traffic from my posts, because people are actually reading the posts and not just going by the tags. Because we don't usually like tap on the picture to see who's tagged, right? If somebody's going to go from your post to somebody else's, it's going to happen in the caption. So.
And so Instagram came for you after YouTube, right? So was YouTube like your initial like push into the social world?
I had been doing Facebook, but again, not as focused, not as thoroughly and committed as I should have been. Yeah, YouTube was the point where it kind of came together and gave me a purpose. So prior to YouTube, I did really, really well on Facebook in terms of getting models to hire me for the modeling portfolios that I was doing. And that worked very, very well. I was using a little bit of YouTube at first for that. I had a series of videos called Model Mondays. And I also had a website that at the time was called The Business of Modeling, which had great Google rankings and that. So most of my traffic then, in terms of my business, it was coming organically through search. I've never done paid search, but I had great rankings on all the articles. And I had a directory of modeling agencies on my site that at the time, with that website, if you went to Google and typed in like modeling agencies in New York, I was like #1 in every state. So that's where I was getting all that traffic from. So I didn't have to sweat the social media stuff too much. Facebook was giving me some attention, but that was it. Once YouTube started, that gave me kind of more of a purpose behind all of them. Facebook came into play really, really quick, because what happened almost immediately when the YouTube channel started to take off, people would then seek me out on Facebook. So I was starting to pick up a lot of followers, a lot of friend requests, that type of stuff. So that made it very, very clear, got to get on board with Facebook. And it was, how can I provide that value? So on Facebook, it's a little bit easier, and was a little bit easier then, to post multiple pictures, even to put up video clips, tell more of a story. And people would read this stuff if you had information there. And of course, I was linking back to blog articles on the website, et cetera. Instagram at first, I just couldn't find a way that to me didn't seem like I was just trying to show off. And it was part of that attitude of not wanting to just be throwing pictures up there like I'm supposed to be amazing, and part of the attitude of not really feeling like, what do I have to brag about with these pictures? So to me, there's got to be that value. If there's no value, then it's just noise, and there's plenty of noise. So.
Yeah, what it like 1 billion photos a day or something like that?
It's
mostly
crazy.
of cats or something.
Yeah, exactly.
So you started YouTube again. So I remember going back, and like I saw some stuff in 2015 or something. Then 16 came, and you were posting pretty frequently, several times a week. Is that still the same schedule? Are you still doing several times a week? You're doing a Togchat on Wednesdays, right?
So it's interesting. So this has also, again, been part of my learning curve. So it's worth just throwing one idea out there before I give you the details. I have always had the philosophy. I can't take credit for it. Steve Jobs used the phrase, but I've always worked in a similar way, just not making nearly as much money as he did. Break stuff and move on. So I've never been afraid to try things and fail. Like the failure thing has never been something I feared, because I believe enough that if I fail, I'm going to learn from that. I'm going to pick up and I'm going to move on. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going forward. So I dabbled in YouTube actually as early as 2009. That video is still on my channel, and that video is still every bit as horrible as the day that I posted it. The audio is horrible. Everything's horrible about it, period. But I dabbled a little bit and played around. When I started to make the move on this full time, 2 months before I shut off all clients is when I started posting videos just once a week. And I was getting a really good response. So that was kind of like the icing on the cake with this whole plan, like, okay, I'm already picking up some momentum. Let's do this. So I made the commitment. I was doing them once a week. I got really lucky. Right after I started, YouTube contacted me and said, hey, we would like to bring you to New York for a week and be a part of this program called YouTube Next Up. And what it was, they were looking at channels in various genres that seemed to have a lot of potential, that were picking up a head of steam. So it literally was, you know, all expenses paid in New York at the YouTube space. It was like a boot camp, 5 12-hour days. Boom. And that, more than anything, like I learned a lot, but more than anything, that was like just hardcore motivation. So I came out of that. I knew that I had something good going with the YouTube stuff, and I had a much clearer idea just in terms of how I needed to develop certain consistencies in my work on YouTube to be able to get people to connect, almost like a weekly television show does. There's certain things you expect to happen at certain times, and that was very important. So I started that, and then I started experimenting. Right about the time I did YouTube Next Up is when live streaming just started. I had never done it before Next Up, so when I came back, I tried it, and got a half decent response. You don't get nearly as many people watching the live streams as you do like a tutorial, but I thought, okay. Well, then I got carried away, and I was doing like image reviews that people would submit. And then people asked me, like, could you do one about marketing? It's like, okay, so then I would do a marketing one. And then people were like, well, you never have time for questions. So then I started doing like a Q&A. So I was doing 3 of them a week at one point, plus putting out my tutorials. That was just nuts. The people that came to the marketing ones loved it, but all in all, I wasn't getting that much viewership. So finally, I wound up kind of paring it back down to one 90-minute one, which I do on Wednesdays now. And it's mostly Q&A, but every now and then I'll have a guest on. Sometimes I will do something with an image, but it's really about, I kind of keep the focus on trying to solve people's problems. I don't do a lot with gear when people call or people ask questions because I'm not a gear guy. I'm a take pictures guy. So, and there's plenty of other people doing the gear stuff, so I try to avoid that. So it's really just about the problem solving. When I became a visionary, along comes this great opportunity that I never anticipated. I mean, it literally kind of dropped into my lap. So that threw my entire schedule upside down because Olympus started sending me around to travel, which is an opportunity I was not going to say no to be able to go out and actually meet so many of the people that are doing my videos and present. So I put the videos on the back burner for a while. I've been putting them out rather randomly. I just signed a lease on this studio space a month ago and have started up production again because now at least the work I'm doing with Olympus, it's still busy, but I've got a routine to it, so I can manage it better. It's been almost a year. So the videos are coming back, the tutorials. I've got like 4 of them in the can right now. I've got 2 more that I want to do before I relaunch. So Togchat will stay on Wednesdays, 90 minutes. The tutorials will come back, again, still focusing on that mix of kind of hows, whys, some behind the scenes, with my shoots. I found a young guy who is in college right now that actually does really nice video work. So I'm including a little bit more kind of real-time video shooting compared to what I used to. Still trying to figure it out. I mean, I've always kind of believed like once I think I know what I'm doing, I should probably stop because we never really know what we're doing. The world's always evolving. It's always changing. Everything is new again. And a lot of people struggle with that. I've always been kind of lucky. Like I enjoy the change. I enjoy when new technology comes into play. I enjoy when there's something new to learn. And I think to ultimately be sustainable as a photographer, to some degree, you have to be that way. Because if you get too stuck in what you do and you're not open to those changes, the business is just going to pass you right by.
Man, that is the truth. When I first started in full-time in 2005, I went to an ASMP meeting and people were freaking out because like all these young guys are coming in with digital. And that was me with my original 4/3 SLR. And I was like, maybe I should not be here. But no, it's true. It's true. So speaking of changes, so some time ago, maybe like a year or so, I believe it was, you had switched from DSLR from Nikon to Olympus. And I watched those videos. And they were very well received, and people were like, one commenter is like, don't tell people how good these are because the prices will go up. And I was like, they have a point. So briefly tell me again how you kind of discovered Micro Four Thirds.
So actually it was because of YouTube. It was 2 years ago, almost 2 years I made the switch. When I went to the Next Up program, They talked me into using the Panasonic GH4 for my videos at that point. I was actually using one of my Nikons, and it was okay, but the GH4 indeed was much better suited. It worked great. You know, they taught me a lot about audio, so I started using Panasonics. Literally the day that the GH5 arrived, so this was months later when I got my first GH5, it was a day that I just did not feel like working. UPS guy shows up, I unpack this thing, and I was like, everybody says that these things are not that good because the sensor's so damn small, but the video is really good. I'm gonna go take pictures. So I stuck a lens on it. I went to a park for an afternoon and just shot like all kinds of crap, the kind of stuff I would take pictures of when I was a teenager starting, like leaves and bark on a tree, whatever. Came back and downloaded the stuff, and I was like, what the hell is everybody complaining about? Like, this is pretty doggone impressive. And it shoots amazing video. So that piqued my interest. I started doing some research, you know, the Google searching, and the general consensus was people would say, you know, people always want to have a clear-cut definition, right? We always look for clear-cut definitions. So people were all like, you know, video, Panasonic, stills, Olympus. I was like, well, that sucks because I don't want to use two brands. Like if I just find using one brand, if anything, a ton easier. Like even using the Panasonic was causing me stress while using Nikon cameras because then I got to think, wait, which camera am I playing with? So I just dabbled with the idea for a long time, watched a bunch of videos and stuff would come up. Finally decided I was going to rent one. So I rented an EM1 Mark II with a 12-40 from lensrentals.com and had it for like 3 days. Spent most of the time taking pictures of my grandson, chasing him around. I wanted to see how well the autofocus worked and the facial detection because didn't have that in Nikon, you know, all that. So, and it was amazing. Shipped it back and immediately realized I was an idiot because I had fun for 3 days, but I really wasn't organized. And so now it was like, but wait, is it going to do this? Is it, you know? So waited a couple months, rented another one again, and this time I had a list. So I spent 3 days and like went down the list of all the things that I wanted to make sure that it could handle this. It ticked off all the boxes. Sent it back. Like, what do I do? Like, I've been with Nikon for so long. I had tried Sony briefly, back when they only had 4 lenses. And I never really liked, they're fine cameras, they're great cameras, but I never really liked the ergonomics on the Sony. That was my thing, just the ergonomics is big for me. That's why, as a Nikon guy, I didn't switch to Canon in the early 2000s when Canon was pretty much crushing Nikon. I just never liked the ergonomics. So, you know, it's kind of like, what do I do? What do I do? And true story, it was Photo Plus in 2017 in New York. I was up there with a media pass, and Saturday morning before the show started, I was walking down an aisle, and I hear this British guy yelling my name. And I turn around, and Gavin Hoey is running down the hallway to talk to me. I'm like, why is Gavin Hoey chasing me? Turns out he listens to my Togchat on Thursdays while he's editing. So I spent about an hour talking to him, and he was great. And, you know, I told him where I was at with it, and he answered a bunch of questions for me, and he introduced me to the marketing people at Olympus, and they were very willing. They said, let us send you a kit and try it out for a couple of months. And so they did. They sent me a kit, and they said, you can have it for 2 months. And the irony of all this, I live 12 minutes from Olympus headquarters. That's the irony of this whole thing. I never considered that as an option, but I had it for 2 weeks and went and burned a credit card and bought my system. I called them and said, hey, you know, I can drop it off because you're right down the road. And very disappointed. They were like, so you're not going to, you know, consider it? I'm like, no, I just bought it. Like, that's it. Hook, line, and sinker. I went. And I knew I would have to get rid of the Nikon stuff or I'd keep just dabbling back and forth, which is stupid. So, yeah, I sold my Nikon gear. So within a month, I went full tilt from one to the other. And honestly, have never looked back. And the whole visionary thing, it was just kind of a domino effect from that point forward. I met their marketing person that does their trade shows. They invited me to Nashville to do a presentation in imaging, and that went well. And, you know, about 9 months after that, they called me and said, hey, would you be interested? I was like, yeah.
That's quite the call.
So, yeah. Oh, indeed.
So I think I saw an Olympus tattoo on your arm.
Well, yeah. So this is embarrassing. So,
but like, I thought that's like a for real tattoo, right?
Oh no, it's very real. Well, you were a visionary.
Hmm.
When the contract comes at the top where it says brand ambassador, I'm a little type A, and I was excited. I mean, I grew up like going to the Nikon short courses where the Nikon ambassadors would come, and
Hmm.
like these
Hmm.
guys were gods, right?
The
So
Nikon
the idea
school.
I was going to be a camera brand ambassador, but I read it in a hurry and thought it said brand the ambassador. Went right out, got the ink. But yeah, so I knew honestly part of it was I'm old enough now, it's not going to cost me a job. I had a couple other tattoos. And I also knew, as dumb as it sounds, but because of the YouTube world, I knew there would be a lot of people that would be like, he's not really serious. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do this because I'm dead serious. Like this was not, I mean, the whole process for me switching from the time I first started with the Panasonics and the GH5 and playing with the idea, it was a year and a half. And it was a lot of like 1 foot over the line, 2 steps back, so it was not something that I just did on a whim. So I figured, yeah, you know what? I'm going to do it.
That's
So
awesome.
that was it. Yeah.
So
So,
how is the using the Olympus system? How is that helping your creativity? Like, what's the end results for you?
well, there's a lot of layers to that. So the first layer, first and foremost, part of the reason for my switch, which I talked about in that video, I was taking most of my pictures with this, unless I was getting paid. And so it was kind of, one day basically like looking at all my gear, my Nikon gear, and it's like, why am I using my iPhone? Like I have thousands and thousands of dollars of this high-end camera gear, and I'm just never motivated to pick it up. So I wanted stuff that was going to be smaller, lighter, much more mobile to be able to work with. I wasn't willing to sacrifice quality. I was one of those sometimes rare photographers that even though I was using a 36 megapixel Nikon D810, I understood I didn't need 36 megapixels. Okay, so I wasn't overly stressed there. It had to, it had to be able to accomplish all the features for me. But what I was really surprised with Olympus is that the number of features in the camera is insane. Like it's really insane. One of the first complaints I heard about Olympus when I was researching, people complained about the menus, and that scared me because the camera's got to be an extension of my mind. I don't want to have to be thinking. When I rented it, I didn't really find a problem with the menus. So I kept kind of looking at what people were saying in the boards and that. Finally kind of got to the point where I realized most of the people were talking about some of the older Olympus models. Like, okay, I'm not dealing with that. Finally, after I used the camera a little bit more, I realized really what's intimidating people is there's so much more in the menus because there's so many more features. I mean, you don't have other camera brands that have things like live composite, or now like with the EM1X, even like live ND, live bulb, live time, all that kind of stuff. You just don't have those kind of features. So there's a lot more to the menus. When I really started shooting with the cameras, like once I made the decision to switch over, because of the work I do on YouTube, a lot of what I was really intrigued by, there were all these really cool features that weren't meant for guys like me, like live composite. Live composite's for astrophotography. It's, for doing like, car trails and that and cityscapes. And I was like, but it's really cool. How the hell could I use it for a portrait, right? And so I decided, all right, let's try painting a background in with a light wand. And people went nuts over it. And that was kind of a further trigger for me. It's like, you know what? You've come to a point now in your career where you can afford, I always tell people where I can afford to suck. When I go on stage for Olympus or when I do a demo for Olympus, I build my shots from scratch. I don't go in with a choreographed set so that every frame looks amazing and that, because that way I can solve problems. I can show people like, look, this is how it happens in the real world, right? This, nobody gets every frame perfect. And these cameras just, for me, they make it simple. I was always one of those photographers that would tend to pack the kitchen sink and then some, which, the bigger your gear, the more you're carrying around. So now, I'm able to carry more gear. I've even kind of relearned my love for zoom lenses. Unfortunately, I'm old enough, like dinosaur age. I was around before zoom lenses existed and around before autofocus existed. And the first zoom lenses were horrible in quality, horrible. And then, you know, with Nikon digital, I was using their 17 to 35 and their 70 to 200. They were like my go-to, you know, lenses for almost everything, but they were big and heavy. And while I love, like now my primary lens is the 45 millimeter f1.2 Pro, and I'll use the 75, but like the 12 to 100 f4, it's just an amazing lens. It's totally an amazing lens. And it wasn't one of the first lenses I got. I had quite a few people that afterwards were like, why didn't you get a lens? You have to get that lens. I'm like, why? And now, like, it's always on a body. It's always on one of my bodies. It's always a standby. And if I'm not doing my portraiture stuff in that, it's the first camera and lens out of the bag, which is great for like anything. So it's really actually, I guess the short answer to that, it's given me more of a license and a little bit more confidence, because kind of just like the tattoo, given that I'm doing the educating stuff right now, I love that I can prove people wrong. I told Olympus when they contacted me, and I tell this to people all the time, online, in person, I'm not going to try and sell somebody an Olympus camera. I do have one goal that I make no secret about, and that is to make anybody that looks at my work or watches my videos, to make them Olympus curious. For one reason. That Sony user is probably not going to buy an Olympus anytime soon. But if I can prove to them how much you can do with a smaller sensor and smaller camera, the next time Sony comes out with a $3,000 body that only has 2 new features to it, they may think twice before they go buy that body right away. And they may wait until they really need the body, or until they're at a point where that body can actually truly make a difference for them in their photography. So I think honestly for me, it was almost like empowering to say, great, like I have right now, I entered a contest just on a whim to see if I could do it. It's a program called Art Pop, which is it's Art Pop Street Gallery. It's an awesome program that runs nationwide. The winning picture, which I won the People's Choice Award for here in southeastern Pennsylvania, it's on a 48-foot wide by 14-foot tall billboard shot with an EM1 Mark II. And it's tack sharp. You walk up to the billboard and like it is tack sharp. Now, part of the reason, in all fairness to everybody, compared to 20, 30, 40 years ago, printing technologies have changed a lot too, right? But yeah, you're able to take a micro four thirds, put it in a billboard, and this is a shot that's got really crisp lines. It's a tight close-up of the girl's face. She's wearing white sunglasses, have really sharp edges. The lips are really hard outlined, tack sharp, micro four thirds. So that, I think honestly for me, that's been the biggest thing. It's like a license. I will come in here sometimes in the studio and set up my mannequin and try to do things that I know don't work. And say, you know what? Where could I take this? How can I maybe not solve it, but how can I take this mistake and tweak it and play with it? Like frequently in my demos, I'll stop down to f/16 and spray water all over the lens, and then aim a flash back into the camera lens. And if I get enough water on the lens and take my finger and just wipe down the front of the lens, I can put a model in between that and get specular highlights all around the model. So it's just like having fun. I mean, honestly, it's really what I consider myself to be blessed with at this point, is just to be able to have fun. So that's a big part of what it's done for me.
And it's very obvious on your YouTube channel, like how much fun you have, which is why I've been kind of like, I should be working. I'm like, I'm watching one of your videos and I'm like, dude, let me just see if he wants to come on the podcast. Cause I mean, for me, when I got into micro four thirds, it was with an EPM1 and I shot some personal work and I'm like, this little $400 camera is cool. And it stayed in my bag for months. But once I did that, I'm like, I think I can shoot some editorial with it. So client of mine's like, you could use it, but we're going to give you a challenging cover to shoot. And it came out great. And then I was like, dude, I'm when the EM5, the original one came out, I'm like, cool. Sold all my DSLRs off. And do you still get a lot of questions about like, you know, how do you get shallow depth of field, or you still see a lot of misinformation like on your channel? People are like, only gets a quarter of the light, or all this weird.
Oh yeah, and I've talked about the whole depth of field and the two-stop difference crap and all that.
Yeah.
I've talked about that in 3 different videos, and I'm literally at the point now. It's like when people ask, like, I'm not even going to honor that question.
Right.
Go watch this video. It's yes. I mean it. Well, you know, here in the United States, we hear the phrase fake news all the time, right? And not to get political, but the fact of the matter is, I think there's always going to be a certain amount of misinformation in almost anything. Some of it's agenda driven, some of it is just people being clueless. The one thing I have found is that if I give people a really sincere response and not tell them they're wrong, but I'm saying, look, you need to go back and you need to really research that with a level head. And I would recommend you go watch these, like actually in my Switch video, I do talk about it in that video. Go back and listen to the way I explained it. I'm not saying it's the best explanation ever, but I guarantee you it's explained a lot more thoroughly than what you're able to communicate to me. So it may change, your perception there. The other thing I point out to people immediately when that conversation comes up, because usually that conversation comes up around the idea that you can't get bokeh with micro four thirds, right? And I don't even care about the pro lenses, which are to die for, the 1.2s. Forget those even. We need to remember that depth of field is not just a shallow aperture, right? We actually have 4 ways to control depth of field. When I learned, all the books said 3, and they still say 3. But if you think about it, and if we're being a little bit creative, there's actually 4 utilities for controlling our depth of field. So obviously the 3 that we all know, we all learn. Aperture, wider the aperture, shallower depth of field. Focal distance, closer we are to the subject, shallower depth of field. Focal length of the lens, longer the lens, shallower depth of field. But there's also the fact that if we look at the field in depth of field, 1/3 of what's in focus is in front of the point of focus, 2/3 is behind. So you're able to also control your depth of field in a scene by not necessarily focusing on your subject, but by moving your focal point if you are paying attention to the other 3 elements. So we really have, in a pinch, and believe me, fortunately not all the time, but I've had situations where I've had to use that as a tool. One of the best examples I could give is shooting a big group of people where it's like 6 rows deep, okay? It's understanding those tools and understanding how to use them that is really the key to depth of field and also dealing with any differences that you're going to get between, a micro four thirds or a full frame. But I think we'll always have people that don't get it and just like the simple answer. But part of the problem too is, and I don't want to pick on any camera brand for this because I frequently just make fun of another brand.
You could totally do it here.
It's we all spend a lot of money on our cameras. The Sony owners sometimes get a bad rap, right? But the bottom line is we all spend a lot of money on cameras. It's no different than it's not a good idea to walk up to somebody that owns a Chevy and say Chevy sucks, buy Ford, right? Not a good idea because they're going to defend that choice, right? So I think that's a big part of what happens with the camera stuff. I really do. It's like, a high-end body on just about any brand today is at least $3,000 buying, right? So that's a lot of money. When that stops becoming a lot of money, maybe it's a different ballgame, but right now that's a lot of money. Add that your lenses, everything else. So people that are really getting into photography, they're investing a lot of money. And I think that right there is a big part of where these, kind of camera wars come from. And so, yeah, it's easier to believe that the smaller sensor and all this other stuff makes this a bad choice if I'm sitting here with $10,000 invested in full frame gear, from a different brand. And honestly, that's fine. That's why I don't tell people, like, oh, yeah, you should switch. Olympus is better. It's not that it's better. It's a matter of what are your needs, right? What are your needs? How can you solve problems with it? For me, it solved the problem of I was just getting tired of all the heavy gear. And I was doing the zombie thing. I was chasing bigger is better, like everybody does. It just seemed to make sense. And finally, it was that wake-up call. And ironically, like some of the unintended benefits, I spend less time retouching because with 36 megapixels and a much bigger file, I was retouching stuff on a girl's face that I'm never going to see in a picture. So it's actually reduced my retouching time. I haven't lost any quality. Certainly, in some situations, if I were to take my micro four thirds image and put it next to a 36 megapixel full frame image, there may be a tiny bit more texture, like visual, tiny bit more texture in my image. And the way I explain that, honestly, for me, it's not for everybody. So I'm not saying this is a right or wrong, but for me, somewhere in like the mid early 2000s. So between like 2005 to 2010, in the industry, we crossed a line. And I don't think anybody like announced it. I think it just happened. But we crossed the line where suddenly it became bad to have any kind of texture in your image. And I'm calling it texture because the word noise has a bad connotation, because indeed, if you were an early digital photographer, noise just sucked, period, right? So I always refrain from using the word noise, because for anybody that's been around, noise is horrible, period. And the fact is, noise today is not what it was 20 years ago. It's not the same thing. Noise today looks a lot like film grain. It's texture. So I actually like film. You know, ironically, people go out and spend a lot of money today on presets and software programs to get the film look. Like, okay, so you're going to buy a 36 megapixel camera, and then you're going to buy a piece of software to put the texture back in. Why not work with a smaller sensor, shoot at a slightly higher SO, and bingo, you've got the exact same end result. So, yeah, I mean,
that's funny.
I think people will always defend their choices.
I feel like I'm listening to myself, because I tell that to people all the time. I mean, I have a roll of 120 from a shoot I did this morning, and the guy's like, well, can you shoot some film? I'm like, cool, but let me shoot digital with it, for obvious reasons. But yeah, it's like, I don't understand people's decisions, but I guess that's their dough. Yeah. That is their dough. Yeah. So you're shooting Olympus for stills, and you were using Lumix for video. Is that still the case?
No, nope. In fact, you're talking to me right now on an OMD EM1 Mark II. It's got a live feed. I have another one that's sitting actually over here with a teleprompter attached to the front of it. So those are my two video cameras. And then when I'm actually shooting in the studio, I'll usually have another Mark II set up for B-roll. And my gas purchase when I switched to Olympus, I didn't need it, but I really wanted it, was a Pen F. It's just a cool camera. It's got the coolest camera logo of any camera on the market. I just love the camera. So part of the way I justify it is I also use that as a B-roll camera. So when I'm in the studio. So yeah, I do all my video. And I waited for the time I bought the Olympus system. It was probably about 6 months before I made the switch, because I didn't want to do too much all at once. I had really just learned the Lumix stuff for video and kind of got that down. So I wanted a little bit more testing time. But the stuff that I had played with when I was kind of working through my checklist and trying the Olympus stuff, that looked great. You know, and again, it's always personal preference. It's no different than, you know, you look at an image out of a Sony or a Canon or Olympus, and they're all going to have a slightly different feel to them because each of those cameras processes differently, right? So I think the video out of Olympus looks great. People that love Lumix, they love Lumix. I think where the big difference comes in all fairness to both brands, is certainly earlier in the game, Lumix put more emphasis on video, and as a result, there's more third-party support for Lumix. Everything, you know, from cages to accessories, you name it, there's a lot more out there. So indeed, for somebody that's like a hardcore cinematographer, you know, Olympus may not be the ideal choice, but I don't think it's necessarily, at least in my opinion, I don't think it's because of the camera so much as it is what's available, you know, to work with a camera. But for my needs and everything I'm doing, yeah, it's awesome. And to be able to work with one body and, you know, or one brand, one set of lenses, have everything interchangeable, for me, that's the perfect scenario, because that way I never have to think twice about the camera that I'm working with.
Yeah, I get that 100%, because there's so much going on in your mind when you're shooting. You don't be like, well, what's this function button in this camera versus this one, and so forth.
Yep.
Now, Olympus released version 3.0 for the EM1 Mark II, correct?
Right.
So that brings in log, Olympus log, but did it bring anything else besides that? Was that the main thing, was Olympus log?
For video?
For video.
Yeah, that was, I mean, that was it for video, yeah. And I'll be full disclosure, I have not had a chance to try it. I don't shoot log. I've done it once, and because I did not give it enough time and energy, I sucked at it.
It's tough. It's tough.
The key with log is your post, right? It's your post. It's working with the LUTs and everything else. Hands down, if you're serious about video, that's the way to go. Absolutely. But for the stuff that I'm doing, it's a lot easier for me. You know, get the light, get the exposure right, and it's going to be fine coming out. So while it's a great feature, it's not one that directly impacts my work in that regard, but it kind of rounds out the EM system in the sense that the EM1X came out with the log capabilities. So the fact that they put that back in, that means both of the flagship cameras are capable of doing that. So I think it was a very smart move on their part, and it's a logical move. I mean, that's one of the great things. That's one of the things that's cool about Olympus. They may not always be considered the biggest and the best brand, et cetera, but Olympus really does drive a lot of the technology and a lot of the working methodology. So, even Sony now is starting to do firmware upgrades with their cameras where they're actually adding features in and things like that, which is that's just how it should be. We spend a lot of money on these cameras. These companies are making good money on this stuff. I'm a firm believer, yes, if you can add a feature in by software, add it in. Don't sell me a new camera for that. Because I'm smart enough to also understand that a lot of new features you can't work on an older camera. Like even looking at a lot of the things that the EM1X does compared to the EM1 Mark II, well, the EM1X has 2 processors. So it's got a lot more power to it. So like all of the artificial intelligence features for the autofocus and that, it would not be possible to put that in the EM1 Mark II. But for the log usage, you can. So yeah, it's to me, it should be an automatic, which Olympus does. They've done that for quite a long time. And I think it's great to see other companies starting to do it now. So.
Yeah, it's cool because if you're shooting with an EM1X and the EM1,
Yep.
now you can match up footage because you can shoot
exactly.
log, which is, man, if you ever try to match footage in post, it's not the same. Forget about it. So do you think you're going to see more? We're going to see more people shooting video with Olympus? Because I shoot a lot of video, and I would love to dive into this world of high-end Olympus video.
Honestly, I do think we will. It's the things that have been fascinating for me kind of coming into the Olympus world. When I was getting close to pulling the trigger and making the change, I went out and started joining all of the different Facebook groups. I think I'm in like 40 different Facebook groups that are dedicated to some form of Olympus something. And there's video groups, there's macro groups, there's black and white groups, there's portrait groups, but and I started to see some really interesting things. So number one, not to sound a little biased, but I found that both the Olympus community and, in all fairness, the Micro Four Thirds community, so much more friendly than the other communities out there. So much more just really into the photography. And it's not to say that there's no bickering, but it's definitely a different environment. But the thing that I'm seeing happen, and I don't want to, by no means am I trying to say, oh my God, yes, people are like leaving the full frame brands, in droves. But I am finding it kind of oddly satisfying, maybe. There's a lot of people giving up on full frame at this point. A lot. A lot of really accomplished shooters, a lot of really talented shooters. People are starting to realize, and we're getting to a point. Again, I love technology. I love what we're developing in the industry. But you know how I talked about going backwards to look forward? What I don't understand about companies like Canon and Nikon and Sony and even Fuji with their 100 megapixel camera, if we look at technology throughout history, and even if we just go back as far as the Industrial Revolution in this country, new technology starts out big and bulky and cumbersome and clumsy. And then we work to make it smaller, faster, lighter, more efficient. But yet, aside from the Micro Four Thirds world, the rest of the photography industry in the last 10 years has been pushing bigger, heavier, more. I mean, the weight and the size of some of these full frame setups at this point, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. When historically, as a society of people, we tend to try to make things smaller. So I think, one, you're going to see a lot more people going that direction, not just for video, but for stills. And two, let's face it, what's the one thing that has happened consistently from the beginning? Yes, Micro Four Thirds is a smaller sensor. Yes, it has fewer megapixels. However, they still keep finding ways to improve the quality, just like they've done with cell phone sensors, right? Part of it is they're making up some of the difference with software. So I think we're going to continue to see the smaller sensors get bigger, both in terms of the sensor quality, but also the processing that goes on behind them. And we're going to reach a point where people are going to get sick and tired of carrying huge cameras. And it's going to start to go in the other direction. Because so much of this technology, again, some of this comes from my wife, the cognitive psychologist. So much of this technology we have now, like 100 megapixels, our eyes and our brains are not capable of actually appreciating the difference. If we're going to bench test it and break it down by the numbers, sure, it's a crisper, clearer image, right? But in terms of what we can see, and you said it earlier, especially in terms of what we're going to see on Instagram.
Because that's where it ends up.
Exactly, right. So nobody's going to know the difference. They're absolutely not going to know the difference. So yeah, knowing that indeed the majority of my work goes into a 1080, video screen or a 1080 Instagram post, but yet I can still go and have it printed on a 48-foot wide by 14-foot billboard. I don't need full frame. Like, what's the point, right? So I think we'll see a reversal. So I don't mean like, oh, everybody's going to leave full frame and everybody's going to leave it, but I think you're going to start to see more pressure on those companies now that they've gotten all this massive technology, and it's cool. Yeah, I mean, I geek out about the toys too, but I think there's going to start to become more and more pressure for them to start to get smaller and lighter. And it's going to be a lot of different things. It'll be different materials to construct the cameras out of, all kinds of different things. But it just doesn't make sense that this far into photography, so many of the companies are adding weight, adding size. And it's not that they're necessarily adding great new features that require the size. So,
and none of those new bigger type of technologies makes anyone a better photographer. That's the thing. I mean, even something simple like a swivel screen and that you can carry your dedicated camera with you anywhere makes you a better photographer, or live time, or if you're inspired to shoot, you are now a better photographer. But if you're like you and I were like, dude, I got all these DSLRs, I just don't want to go shoot with them, then the fun comes out, and then it's just a downward slope from there. So that's so true. We've kept you on long enough, and I could talk to you about a lot of things, but maybe I will.
Appreciate it.
Maybe I will in August, because you are coming to Austin here in August.
I am. Yeah, I'm going to be at Precision Camera. Olympus is doing an Olympus weekend event, so it's August 9th and 10th. On August 9th, my fellow visionary Tracy McGlosky is going to be doing, I think, 2 events that day. And then on Saturday the 10th, I'm doing 1 event at Precision Camera store. It's going to be a fashion portraiture event. We're going to try and have some fun, do some crazy things with some smoke and some water, and we'll definitely do some live composite stuff. And then Saturday night, I'm going to do a 3-hour event downtown at the Hotel Indigo. So we're going to do a rooftop shoot. But sorry, folks, we're not taking out the heavy strobes and the octaboxes. We're going to have some swimsuit models. We're going to shoot with existing light. We're going to work on finding really good backgrounds. We're going to work on working with the light that is there. So about as far as we're going to go with modifiers, we'll always have some reflectors. But even then, I'm going to teach you the right way to use reflectors, not like they do in the movies underneath. We're going to get them up. We're going to angle the light and have a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I made a visit to Precision last summer. Great store. Like, I'm really jealous of you guys, just the size of that store, because camera stores are not doing well across the country. In fact, another big one in St. Louis just bit the dust in the last week, which is just such a shame. So those folks at Precision, not only do they have a beautiful store with tons of great stuff, but they put on a lot of amazing events there. So I'm really jealous.
Yeah, this I'm going to be there. Maybe I'll be you carry your gear, or carry Tracy's gear around.
That'd be awesome. It'd be great if you could make it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. You have a ton of links. I'm going to put them in the show notes, but where should we just kind of generally direct people that are listening to this to find you online?
Start with my website, joeedelman.com. That's the easiest. And then from there, you'll find the links. I am most active between Facebook and Instagram on the traditional social media. YouTube every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. I do the live Togchat, which is all open Q&A, so you can come in. It's all interactive. The tutorials, another 2 weeks, they're going to be starting to come back, once a week. I'll be picking up with a tour of my new studio space here. Recently, I posted some pictures. I've actually been having a lot of fun with this one. So I frequently do a lot of composites, but I found a really good deal one day on Amazon. I'm convinced my portrait's hanging in Amazon's lobby, but I found a good deal on a 65-inch television. Got it for like just over $400.
Whoa.
I said, you know what? If I do the math on background costs, that's pretty good. So I bought the TV, a $70 stand, and I used the TV as a portrait background.
Nice.
And I can use stock photos, or I can use basically anything, put it on the TV, and I've got 1,000 backgrounds. I've got 2,000 backgrounds. Or I might have a background that's like a street scene, and I want to give it a blue tint like it's night. So I can go into Photoshop, tint it, put it back on the screen, and I've got a whole new background to work with. So I've been playing around with that. That's going to be one of the first videos that'll be coming out. It's kind of that whole setup and how I deal with the reflections from the lights on the TV and all that kind of stuff. It's actually really, really easy. And even how I deal with what lenses, because I like to shoot with a 45. I find that with a TV, I use the 75 a little bit more just to get a little more compression, but you can still use both. So yeah, I'm having a lot. That's one of kind of my new, let's play around and see what I can do with that. So that stuff's all coming up real soon.
Nice. I'm looking forward to that because that sounds amazing.
Yeah,
Joe,
it's a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for coming on, man.
I appreciate it. Thanks for
I'm
having
honored
me,
that you were able to come on.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And I will see you. I will see you in August.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, just about. It is. In fact, it's just a month away. So yeah.
Right on. Thanks so much.
All righty. Thank you. Take care.